Jail time, travel bans and penalties of up to $100,000 should be enough incentive to stop bad behaviour on flights. But there's no shortage of passengers breaking the rules anyway.
It's ridiculous, unacceptable. I mean, it's un-Australian.
We have had customers that have shown really aggressive behaviour.
You can end up in custody at the end of the flight. You can end up handcuffed during the flight.
Air travel is rarely easy. For most people, the biggest problem is not having enough legroom or having to queue for the loo. But for some, the slightest aggravation or too much booze trips them into a mid-air explosion of anger that rocks everyone on board. This was on a recent Scoot flight from the Gold Coast to Singapore. The man's pent-up anger and brawny muscles were no match for the flight attendants. Passengers had to wrestle the man to the floor and bind his hands with cable ties to restrain him. Clinical psychologist Dr. Simon Kinsella says air rage can be sparked by anything from not enough sleep, personal problems or mental health.
And all of these influences combine to get a person to a point where they just can't hold it together anymore and they snap.
But the last place anyone would want to see someone unloading is at 30,000 feet, halfway across the Pacific or Indian Ocean.
There's nowhere that you can go. So if you're stuck in a seat in a plane that's absolutely full, then there's very little alternative for you. So it is much more terrifying to be confronted with that kind of anger.
So what should passengers do when confronted with an ugly onboard punch-up? Do you get involved or look the other way? Professor Ron Barch, former head of safety for Qantas, says violent passengers should be managed by cabin crew only.
Don't take the law into your own hands, because even in that, and quite inadvertently, you may even be committing an offence in doing so.
There was a time when flying was a long but genteel experience.
QEA, Qantas Empire Airways, as it's now known, operates the short C-class flying boats in modern luxury and comfort.
A big comfy seat, a scotch and a smoke, and a stopover at Raffles in Singapore.
And what's more, the trip only takes 9 days, which includes 70 hours of flying and 36 stops.
But today, it's a high-speed business where airlines aim to fill as many seats as possible, and there's barely enough room to swing a cat, let alone throw a punch. Quentin Long from Australian Traveller says it's the perfect environment for air rage.
So the more frequently we travel, the less glorious flying seems, and so we're becoming more and more angry. Well done on this issue, it looks fantastic.
While Quentin Long comments from an arm's length, Rebecca McLean from the Flight Attendants Association of Australia has been on the receiving end more times than she'd care to remember.
A flight attendant that goes to work is often faced with someone that's angry, and we do deal with that situation pretty much every time we go to work.
Rebecca's been working as a flight attendant for 15 years and says many passengers have zero patience. They can be rude, intimidating and sometimes even physical.
I had a young man who was showing aggression as he was boarding the aircraft. He then had a verbal confrontation with another group of young men, and that escalated really quickly into some pushing and shoving.
I will kill everybody on this plane! All crew undergo extensive training on how to deal with an air rage incident.
There's very strict protocols and procedures with Qantas and indeed all airlines as to what would be done.
The captain's first priority is to protect the cockpit at all costs. To make sure that happens, they have similar powers to police. They can even arrest or detain an unruly passenger until they can land the plane safely and law enforcement officers can step in. And the consequences could be severe. 10 years behind bars for anyone who assaults, threatens or intimidates a cabin crew member. A lengthy travel ban, and if the plane has to be diverted, the passenger could be forced to foot the bill
for fuel, grounding the plane and reimbursing everyone for the inconvenience caused.
Amounts of 10,000 or even more is quite likely if an aircraft's got to divert. It could even go up to the 100,000 mark.
That could pay for a round-the-world trip 40 times over. So if you don't want to get the boot, buckle up, bite your tongue and
sit back and relax and enjoy the rest of the flight.